as the new normal. Theodosius doesn't rebuild the legions because, realistically, he can't. The recruiting base is gone. Italy isn't producing large military populations anymore. The provinces are strained themselves. Africa functions more as a tax engine than a manpower reservoir. So eventually he does what resource-constrained systems almost always do. He outsources. In 382, after years of fighting that increasingly looked like negotiations, with occasional violence attached to them, Theodosius signs a treaty with the Goths, and the terms are extraordinary. The Goths are allowed to settle inside Roman territory. They receive agricultural land in the Balkans. They remain under their own leadership, with their own customs, their own legal structures. They do not fully assimilate into Roman civil life. In exchange, they provide military service when called upon. Now Rome had made agreements with outside peoples before that, but earlier treaties usually worked towards absorption. Outsiders eventually became Roman. This treaty preserves Gothic identity inside the empire itself. That's the real shift. It creates a parallel nation within Roman borders. The border fault line doesn't crack here. It's legally dissolved. The Danube is no longer functioning as the hard edge of Roman civilization. It becomes more of an administrative line that people cross under negotiated terms. And once that happens, the territory itself changes. Now you have two populations occupying the same imperial space, without sharing the same loyalties, language, legal system, or increasingly, even a worldview. At the same time, the financial problems deepen. Because Rome isn't just giving land, it's paying subsidies in gold. An armed, autonomous population inside imperial territory is effectively being compensated not to revolt. And there's a pattern empires eventually discover when they start paying tribute. The price never stabilizes. It rises. Because the tribute-paying state demonstrates weakness every time it pays, and the recipient learns that pressure is profitable. The Goths weren't grateful. They were strategic. They understood Rome needed them more than they needed Rome, and each year that imbalance became more obvious as Roman military strength declined further. So the settlement wasn't really a solution, it was an admission. And admissions have a way of becoming permanent realities. That's how borders usually fail historically. Not in cinematic invasions. They thin out first. Enforcement becomes inconsistent. Administrative fiction replaces actual control. Then eventually someone formalizes what everybody already knows. Theodosius didn't lose the border in the conventional sense. He declared it unnecessary. That's a different kind of collapse, and probably a more permanent one. Well, this is happening externally. Something else is happening inside the empire. Theodosius is building a theological state. In 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declares Nicene Christianity the sole religion of the empire. Not preferred, exclusive. Every other form of worship becomes illegal. And this is a radical shift for Rome. For centuries, the empire had tolerated enormous religious diversity. Not necessarily because Romans were philosophically tolerant in the modern sense, but because tolerance was efficient. People focused on rebellion, on taxes, land disputes, political power, not theology. Theodosius changes that equation. Religious conformity becomes tied directly to loyalty to the state. And over the following years, the laws intensify. Pagan temples are closed, assets confiscated, sacrifices criminalized. Even private worship is eventually prohibited. That isn't just spiritual reform, that's an economic transformation. The pagan temples of the empire held enormous wealth, accumulated over centuries: land, gold, institutions, endowments. When those assets are seized, that wealth doesn't disappear, it moves. And most of it moves in the hands of the Christian church, which suddenly becomes one of the largest institutional landowners in the empire. And Theodosius needs that church, because increasingly the army isn't fully his anymore. The military structure is becoming dependent on barbarian troops and barbarian generals, while the traditional Roman political order is hollowing out. The church offers something else: hierarchy, communication networks, administrative infrastructure, and moral legitimacy. And now, wealth. In exchange, the emperor receives something the treasury